Hello and welcome back to another SpyMaster interview. I'm Agent Scott.
And I'm Cam the Provocateur.
And we are back in the cockpit for a second time this week, talking all about Firefox.
That's right. We're going to let this one fly, baby.
And we're all out of puns already. But Cam, who have we got joining us this week?
Yes, we have co-writer Wendell Wellman joining us. He was one of the writers who helped adapt the Craig Thomas novel into the final film Firefox. He's also an actor, so he's going to have some stories about working on movies like Sudden Impact, the fourth Dirty Harry movie, as well as the Terence Young directed film The Klansman.
It's an absolutely fascinating chat with Wendell about adapting a book into a major motion picture, as well as, of course, the rest of his filmography. So, Cam, I think without further ado, roll the interview.
Roll or barrel roll?
And joining us on the show now, the writer of this week's film, Firefox, the co-writer, I should say, it is, of course, Wendell Wellman. Hello, Wendell.
Hello.
How are you doing today?
Doing good.
Well, thank you for joining us on the show. Now, we've been speaking about Firefox all week this week, so it's great to sit down with one half of the team that made the adaptation of the novel. But before we get into Firefox proper, what we'd like to do is get to know you a little bit better. So the first question I have for you is, how did you get started in Hollywood? What made you want to go into sort of acting and writing as well?
When I was at UCLA, I was getting a graduate degree in English literature, and I stumbled into the theater and fell in love with it and started taking classes there and started taking film classes. And it just became halfway through my graduate degree, I was taking more classes in the film division and the UCLA and the theater division than I was English literature. So I knew when I finished that I wanted to pursue that. So I went to acting school first and was there for 8 years about. And by my fourth year, I landed my first big role, and which was kind of a weird film, but it had great stars in it, Lee Marvin, Richard Burton, and so I was the fourth build in that film as a debut. So that started well for me, but acting is difficult in LA. You get hot for a while, and then you're not hot, and I couldn't stand the financial insecurity. So one of my classmates at UCLA had gotten a job as a reader at United Artists, which is Sony, which is now Sony, but it was MGM UA then, reading scripts. And I said, get me a job doing that. So he did, and we both read and analyzed screenplays for the studio chief for about a year. And then one day he called us in out of nowhere and said, you guys write better than the scripts you're reading. Do you want to write? And of course, that's just that doesn't happen very often. So we said, well, yeah, sure. So he said, okay, bring me back a story tomorrow. So we came back the next day and we had a little story based on something that had happened to me when we were both at UCLA. It was I stumbled on a murder story by accident and for real. So we told him that story. He got us an agent. The agent got us a producer who was an English producer, Andrew Bronsberg, who is the producing partner for Roman Polanski. And he paid us to develop the script. And that script led to a second writing job at Paramount for the two of us, Alex Lasker and myself. And we were roommates at UCLA. That's how odd this whole thing is. And then that script was supposedly a sequel for the movie Black Sunday, starring the British actor Robert Shaw. But while we were halfway through the paid assignment, the movie came out and bombed financially. So they just told us we didn't even have to finish the script. We did anyway. And then by a fortuitous circumstance, Spielberg read the script and he liked the writing. He didn't like the script. He liked the writing. So he called Eastwood and said, I think I found writers for you for this book you want to do. So that's how it happened. So, and at that point, we went into Clint's office. I'd never met him. He was my kind of hero as an actor. And I thought, I'm about to meet Dirty Harry. So he came in and threw us the book, Firefox, and said, read this, tell me whether you want to do this. And I went away laughing with Alex, and I said, tell me whether you want to do this. Are you kidding me? So that's how my career began. And then it kind of went back and forth. I would land an acting job, I'd get another writing job, and it just kind of went from there. It's all, I teach occasionally. I'll teach acting sometimes. I'll teach writing sometimes. And I always tell people, look, a lot of it is hard work. And then there's an element of luck that you just can't explain. It certainly was true for me.
Well, I just had a quick question about,
Sure.
You referred to one of your early debuts, the Klansman, the film that you starred in. And
I didn't star. I mean, I was like the feature. I played Lee Marvin's son, so I had a major role. Yeah.
Yeah. And that movie was directed by Terence Young, who we've covered a lot on the podcast because he directed several of the James Bond films. And I was just wondering if you could touch on, early in your career being directed by Terence Young.
Oh yeah, that's funny that you would bring. That in itself is another act of luck. I'd gone 4 years studying acting and auditioned and auditioned and auditioned and never got anything. And then my agent called me up and said, look, we may have a little bit of luck here. My dad is a co-producer on this movie that Terence Young is going to direct. So I can at least get you an audition. He said, my dad will actually support you, but it's up to Terence whether you get the part. So I went in and met him, and I found out that he directed Dr. No and From Russia with Love. And both of those were two of my favorite Bond movies ever, and he was a great, dapper Englishman, and he talked to me for a long time. I kept waiting for him to have me read or do something. And I was waiting for the dreaded question, what have you done? But he just, after about 45 minutes talking to me, he said, okay, look, I want you to cut your hair and come back in a week. You have features that look a little bit like Lee Marvin. So you could work as his son, but come back. So I came back a week later. I had my hair cut, and he was wonderful. He was just a great guy and told stories. And I mean, it was not an audition. I mean, it was, so he finally said, okay, yeah, I really like your look. So he said, tell me what you've done. Of course, then I figured I was dead. So I just said, and I'd read that once that Michael Caine had said something similar, but I just said to him, which was the truth, 75 auditions. And he laughed. He said, oh, that's so great. He said, you're great, with the English accent. He said, you got the part. And I went, what? I said, don't you want me to read? And he said, no. He said, I discovered Sean Connery, discovered Ursula Andress. I never made him read. I can tell with a person, you got it. And that was it.
Interesting.
And then it was great joy to work with him. And he was really kind, and, it was a lot of fun.
So very, would you say quite relaxed as a director on set?
Oh, yeah. He didn't really bother you at all. The only thing he did with me that was upsetting one day is one scene with Lee and I. He made me pace back and forth, and I knew I was going to look bad on film. I hadn't had enough acting experience to know how to do a back and forth and somehow keep your kind of vanity working, So when the film came out, I mean, I just looked like a runaway pony, and Marvin got to sit there stoically and look like a movie star. But Lee even knew after the scene. He came up to me and he said, look, he said, this is part of your baptism. You're the punk on the movie. I'm the star. So the star gets to sit there and do nothing, but you have to, make a fool of yourself. So, but other than that, he was great and was really sweet to me all the time. And Lee Marvin was really wonderful. He kind of adopted me like I was his own son, insisted I eat with he and his wife every night after shoots. And eventually I visited him on his ranch in Tucson a couple of times, and it was cool. But again, that was luck. I mean, I got that part and I never auditioned for it. So how do you explain things like that? I don't know.
In terms of sort of being under the learning tree and a sort of a baptism, as they said before, of acting, that's one way to start under Terence Young.
Yeah, exactly. I was fortunate I didn't do a lot of films because I was busy writing most of the time. My acting career really suffered because I kept getting more paid assignments and stuff. But the films I've done, I've been lucky to always work with great directors. Like I did Summersby with Richard Gere about 20 years ago, and that was an English director, John Emile. You know, and of course, Clint directed me in Sudden Impact. So I've worked with some really great directors over the years, and I feel fortunate that way.
Well, we started talking about Firefox and Clint just before we went back to Klansman. So let's get into that story. That's okay. why we're here. So you said you were working with Alex. You knew him from UCLA, and then
we met in an acting class at UCLA, and he was a film major, and then we started taking all the film classes together. You know, helping each other with our papers. Yeah, and then we became roommates. So we had a long history before we started writing together. Never thought we would write together. We didn't know that was coming. Yeah, go ahead.
And that must have helped the chemistry of writing, because splitting a script is tough. You have to designate jobs to people, and that's a hard thing to do with two people.
Yeah, we had a kind of a built-in system from day one, because we after Metavoy gave us that first writing break, we sort of developed an ability. We kind of worked together in an office, and we'd assign each other scenes, and he'd write one scene, I'd write another scene, then we'd switch it, pass it across the table, and we'd both sweeten the other guy's scene. So eventually it felt uniform. We had our own system by the time Clint offered us this job. So do you want to talk about Firefox now?
Yeah, absolutely. So if we're going into that, so then go ahead, Wendell.
You know, we took the book home and read it, and I loved the book. So did Alex, and I read it overnight. I think it was an English writer, Craig Thomas. Seems like I'm always coupling up with English people here.
Sorry about that.
No. Don't apologize. I told you last time. I wish I had an excuse to live there. I love London and all of England and Ireland. Last year I was in Ireland. I would make a home there in a New York minute. The book, it was really a kind of almost a genre cross, because on one level it was a spy thriller. It was really a Cold War spy movie, you know, in the heart of it, you know, but then the other part was the sort of Hollywood sort of thriller, steal a plane and have a plane chase and get out of Dodge. Both Alex and I were drawn to the Cold War spy part of the film, which was a big part of the book. I mean, the book was really 3 sections. He's recruited, he agrees, they train him and fly him over there. Then it's like a Cold War spy thriller. He's functioning essentially as a spy, working his way through Europe into Moscow and into Siberia, wherever the plane was. And then, of course, the final section's the dog fight, trying to get out of town. So we kind of tried, which was now as a writer, I'm more advanced. I wouldn't have done the same thing quite, but we tried to be as true to the book as we could. I'm adapting a book right now for a company there, and I'm taking more liberties than I would have taken then. You mean recognizing, okay, that I know that's what's needed, but got to create some unique circumstances to achieve that. So we stayed with the book as much as we could. And the only regret I have in that experience is the book had a lot of exposition in the first third when he's being recruited and trained. And they, what I meant by that, a lot of big, huge, lots of people in the room, meetings where the English, what's their version of?
MI6, it would be international.
MI6 meetings with also Americans, CIA people there talking about what the jet can do and how difficult it's going to be to get this guy in there. There were a lot of that, and we kind of were faithful to the exposition. So when the movie came out, critics attacked us for having too long exposition. I learned from that, and I just said in the future, I'm going to, no matter how faithful I want to be to a book, if it seems too long to me, I'm going to cut. So but we didn't know then. But otherwise, the one thing that was in the book that I thought was really unique, it's not unique now, they're doing it more often, but he had a PTSD kind of illness, from Vietnam. And so he would, under anxiety, experience flashbacks of the horror of the war. So the book had him have that several times, but we chose a couple of other stressful times to let it happen again, including, there are two I can think of. One where he first gets over there in disguise, and his handlers meet him and immediately murder a guy and tell him to take his identity. We gave him, it began to come on to him there. And then at the moment when he's upstairs and dressed in the hangar, ready to go downstairs to steal the plane, we have him have a major attack that almost makes him dysfunctional, which also puts the Russians who were helping him down in the hangar at jeopardy. So I love that device. It really gave it an extra kind of tool for us, but it was really his idea.
Well, it's really fantastic because not only is it just dramatically gripping when you have those sequences, because it does kind of throw up a barrier between what you need to accomplish, but also it gives you some insight into the character, because I wanted to talk a little bit about just writing the Clint Eastwood character, because so often in Clint Eastwood films, he's kind of a man of few words. A lot of the film is him being escorted by other people. And I would love to know about just shaping a Clint Eastwood character and what he's sort of bringing to you with suggestions.
You mean like what was he talking to us as writers?
Yeah, like what is he looking for in terms of a role to play in the film?
Yeah, I think he really, and again, I also, as you guys know, did Sudden Impact for him, which I played a major role in, and also did a rewrite on the film with him. So I got to collaborate with him both as director of me and as co-writer in the trailer of fixing some scenes. And then I did a third writing project for him as well. So I got to, he really recognizes his strengths and weaknesses. He recognizes that his strength is that he doesn't have to do anything. He can just stand there, and the inner life he has is so strong that he doesn't. So he chooses roles. I think I see over the years, he's still doing it, even at 90 years old. He chooses roles where A, he's an outsider, B, he's been put upon by society. He's oppressed in a way. So he kind of brings a lot of pathos and anger to the part without saying a word. And third, he's nonverbal as much as he can. You're not going to see him too often. Once in a while, I think in Unforgiven, I forgot, but I think he gave himself a monologue in that one. But they're rare. He'd rather have like he did in Sudden Impact, have this classic line, "Go ahead and make my day," which just says everything. And, then a lot of actors who like to tear up the scenery and have big arias, I call it, like operatic aria. He doesn't want that. He knows. I mean, I remember when I did a scene with him in Sudden Impact. Well, I didn't really do the scene. I'd just done my scene, and then he did his scene. I was right next to him when he did it. We weren't together. It was separate scenes, but we just shot them back to back. And I saw him just walk up, and he had a couple lines with the sheriff. And I thought to myself, he's doing nothing. He's doing absolutely nothing. And yet you see it on film and it's all there, so it was a great acting lesson for me. And I've tried to pattern that style ever since to some degree. Wherever I think I'm at, whatever level I think I'm at, I'll see if I can drop it even a level lower than that, So here, as far as, I remember we wrote the first draft, and as is his style, we didn't hear from him for a few days. So Alex and I started getting very nervous, like, maybe he hated what we did, And then out of nowhere, he calls us on the phone, and we were at our little office, and we put him on speaker. Wendell, this is Clint, Alex Clint. Read the draft, really liked it. Really don't have a lot of. I just would like you to maybe that section on page 70 to 90. Maybe if you could cut that in half and make it maybe half as long. Take out some. And then on section, maybe a line or two, like when the plane lands on the iceberg. Maybe he says, "Check the oil and gas." He'd throw in his own lines, right? But they were so minimal. He just let us do what we wanted to do. So we did. We added his "check the oil and gas." It was a great line when he got out of that plane on the iceberg, and and then we added a few other things and cut a few things down. And after sending the second draft, and he said, "Okay, we're ready to shoot." I mean, since then I've had producers that just labor you. I mean, labor you, tons of notes, and then tons of more notes, and then more notes. And you keep doing, and all of a sudden, whatever the life in the material was is just gone. I mean, you just, he doesn't believe in that. And he also said to us, he tells his writers, "I do never want this to go to arbitration. You will agree to the credit you agree to, and then that's it. And if you take me to arbitration over some other writer, you'll never work for me again." So he basically gives you a lot of license and protects the writer like that. And, he's a dream, really, to work with.
Well, it sounds, just as a writer, that sounds like a great experience, because the classic story as a writer in Hollywood is, oh my God, just being run through the mill. Whereas it sounds like Clint Eastwood's very supportive.
He's really, he was never a writer as himself, and he doesn't pretend to be, but he has a great respect for writers, and really if he hires you, he's basically saying, I trust you. I like your talent. That's why you're here. Go do your thing. And I remember when I was doing the third project for him, which was a Final Dirty Harry, which unfortunately he ended up never making, even though he told me it was a go picture. He finally decided, his agent at the time, Lenny Hershan, who eventually signed me, I was his client too. He told me, Clint finally just said to him, "I'm too old to do it." I mean, he loved what I did. At the time when I was doing that one, he was mayor in Carmel. He decided to run for mayor, which he later, on one of those calls to me, writing calls, he complained about how this was the biggest mistake I ever made, going to luncheons and ladies' meetings about gardening, he was really, he only became mayor because he didn't like some restriction they were putting on his property. So, but he didn't realize all the things he'd have to do up there. But he called me from Carmel, and he, after bitching about being mayor for 10 minutes, he'd give me maybe 2 notes. The one sequence when he gets out of jail, "I want you to blah, blah, blah. Could you do that? Would that be a problem?" I said, "No." And I go and write it in 5 minutes. I mean, his notes were always like him, minimal.
Right.
And back to the Firefox, I felt like the best part of his directing and the movie was the Cold War stuff. I thought him entering, the Eastern Bloc and how they transported him across several, continents and subways and all that stuff was really right in I don't know how you guys feel because you're spy enthusiasts, but I felt like it was right in the Cold War genre. Mm-hmm. I don't know how you guys felt, huh?
I think the stuff in the subway was probably the strongest moment, especially the bit in the toilet where he's accosted by one of the KGB and he has to try and get out of that situation.
Oh yeah, that's what I'm talking about. That whole stuff in there was really great, and we felt it was great on the script too. That was to me the heart and soul of the movie. What, out of curiosity, you guys do another spy project every month, or how do you do this?
Once a week.
Once a week. And so is your audience a lot of it spy enthusiasts?
Yeah, primarily so.
Seems to be, yeah.
So how would you compare this to some of the other films you do?
I would put this up there with, because the thing is, this film walks a fine line. It's both an action film in one part, the latter half of the film, and then you've also got the Cold War espionage that we mentioned. And so it's hard to sort of give it a direct comparison, because most films we encounter tend to be very much action, a la James Bond, or more Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, which is complete Cold War espionage. So it's kind of hard to give you a comparison as to things we would rank it up against. I mean, we definitely have bits we like. We are also both big fans of the flight sequences at the end and the dog fight.
Big fans of what?
The actual action sequences at the end with the dog fights with the airplanes and everything. So the jets. I think that was really well done, and the special effects was also phenomenal. I think on that stuff.
Yeah, like it's a really interesting blend of that sort of almost like Le Carré Cold War storytelling with that post Star Wars like effects blockbuster stuff. Like there's not a lot of movies like that.
Exactly. Thank you. That's what I said in the beginning. You know, I said it kind of crossed two lines there. Yeah. And that hadn't been done very often.
No.
Well, a question I had for you, Wendell, just about the process of adapting a novel.
Right.
There's one thing coming up with an original idea and fleshing out your own idea, something you're passionate about, but working from someone else's concept and having to change things and make it a feasible project for a screen, or if you're doing it the other way around, making a book out of something, I imagine is a very difficult process. So one of the questions...
It is. I'm doing that right now on this project. This is another book. This is now my third book that I've adapted, that I've been paid to do. The second one was Fair Game, which Stallone turned into Cobra, and then I lost my credit on it, but I was paid to adapt the book, and it was an English writer. My whole career has been with English people, but that was a woman, what was her name? I can't even think of her name now. She was an English writer who wrote the book Fair Game, and Mark Rosenberg hired me. He was studio chief at Warner Brothers. That was after I'd done Sudden Impact and Firefox, to adapt that book. So I did that, and now currently I'm adapting a book called Harold's Story for the actual writers of the book. But I'm the third writer in. They've had two previous screenwriters, and they've come to me. So I have some experience now. This is now my third time adapting. Here's what the problem is. I mentioned it a little bit ago. The book will have, let's say, a segment that you need because it's connective tissue, but the book may not have very good connective tissue for that section. Mm-hmm. So you have to come up with something brand new out of your own life, try to come up with a sequence of maybe 2 or 3 scenes that somehow arc that section that work in place of that, but then marry it right back into where the material is working at the end of that. Does that make sense? I'm sounding pretty
no, it does.
abstruse here.
Well,
I just
what was the area, the scene in Firefox for you? What was that version in Firefox? What was that section of the book?
We didn't really do that much in that, but we really followed the book. I mean, I think when he got to Russia, when he got to wasn't it in Siberia? I forgot, somehow, wherever it was, that once there, we kind of created some of our own sequences about how he kind of breaks in through the gates and using, other people. We kind of gave life to those 3 people down in the hangar that were going to help him. We had him hang with them and, kind of get to know. That was where we did our own work. Kind of wasn't in the book as much, but we felt like you want the audience to have a pathos for these 3 people that know they're going to die down there, that are going to actually get him on the plane. They know they're going to die for it. We wanted to create a little time with them so that you care about them a little bit. So that was one example. I talked about finding several more places to use the
PTSD,
stress reactions to inform a scene that weren't in the book. That's little ways we did that, but I'm much further as a writer now than I was then. So I'm thinking of a section I just did on this book. What was in the previous 2 scripts was just not workable. And what was in the book was abstruse. I mean, it talked about the breakup of a marriage, but it didn't explain how. So I just spent an agonizing 2 weeks crafting 4 scenes leading up to the wedding, and then 8 scenes leading into the disintegration. And I just worked and played puzzles because I knew I only had, this is a way of informing what you're answering the question. I knew that as far as script length goes and what's going to happen next in this particular book is so huge that I only could tell a beginning, middle, and end of a relationship in about 6 or 7 pages. So I spent 2 weeks outlining different sequences of things that could somehow, each scene could stand for a progression in the relationship to the end. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, it does.
So the scenes had to serve as really, each one was a progression to begin, to fall apart, to gradually fall apart, to explode. That's the kind of things you got to do in an adaptation. You're still telling the exact same story, but there's times when the initial book just doesn't give you enough information. So you have to kind of craft your own. Each little segment in a long story should have its own arc, should have its own beginning, peak, disintegration into the, and you have to kind of, the books, there are very few writers in a book that do that.
Right.
They like to, I find that writers in books don't work with outlines as much as we do. They like to kind of just start going. And if they want to go on a side trip, they do. And then they do 6 months later. I mean, that's making it hard on the screenwriter. You can't play too many 6 months laters in a movie, and keep your audience. They're used to moment by moment storytelling. You can maybe have 1, at the most 2, but books will have 7 or 8 sometimes. And they also always want to go meanwhile back at the ranch and then go do chapters on somebody else at second. You can't do that. And unfortunately, Marvel Comics, the Marvel universe has killed about 90%, well, not 90 is too exaggerated, 70%, let's say 70% of what could be a traditional storytelling that you could get away with in film. This
right.
Younger audience does not want you to do meanwhile back at the ranch. 5 months, they don't want that. They want, they need a bump every 5 minutes. There has to be a twist every 5 minutes, another, So even when you're doing, this book I'm adapting right now is really serious material. It's a true story about a kid in New York that everything that could possibly happen to him in an abusive way did, and he turned into a criminal and all that. It's serious stuff. It's not Marvel Comics. So, but the book was just, to give you an example of struggles, the book is just a series of transcripts of his conversations with the therapist.
Mm-hmm.
So my job was to take all those conversations and then find sequential real events to translate that stuff, So what's happened to me, though, is I've actually got to a point where I prefer books.
Right.
It's easier in the end. You're not having to be responsible for the entire story. You can be, I tease the people I'm working with right now. I said, because they already had 2 writers, and the first one got paid really big bucks. I'm very envious of the first guy on this particular assignment. He got big bucks, and then one of the producers came in and did another draft, and now they brought me in for much less bucks to somehow make it all work. and I said, at least you've got a narrative down. And I said, I'm going to think of myself as Jimmy Page. I'm just going to look for licks inside of Robert Plant's lyrics, you know, and that's really fun for me. I'm good at that. I'm really good at it. And so I'm thinking in the future, I'm just going to say to somebody, it doesn't happen that often, when somebody says, do you want to work for me? I'll say, is it a book? I'll take it. If it's not, I don't want to do it.
Well, you're doing the Clint Eastwood style. You're working to your strength.
Yeah, that's what I figured over the long. I mean, I've written probably 20 original scripts at least. I'm not all of them. Some of them were paid assignments. I did a couple projects with Warner Brothers. I did a couple projects at Fox and Paramount and Universal. I mean, I've done all that, and I've done a lot of my own originals. And when you do an original where you're going to end up doing 10 to 12 rewrites before it's ready. And so that's a year of your life, a minimum year.
Yeah.
Okay. And when I tell young writing students that, because I do teach writing sometimes at a group called Storyboard in LA, I just say, you know, be prepared to do 10 rewrites till you really have it all, you know. So that's a long, but somebody else has done at least they told a story. It may not be well told, but they told a story. Then you can be Jimmy Page, and you can stand on the sidelines and wait for Robert Plant's, you know, lyric to start to ebb, and then you come in with this incredible fill, you know, and take it to another level. So I love doing that. So
it gives you the foundation to work from, and that's what you know, Craig Thomas's book did. We didn't have to worry about, okay, what happens next? He did this leads to that, leads to that. What we could do then is start to try to make it artistic and find little ways to fill. And just to finish off what I was asking before, what was the toughest moment then in the book to turn into a scene? What, if you can recall that? I know you mentioned that putting the PTSD more into it, but was there a particular moment that was just very tough to adapt?
I thought the flying sequences were very hard, because the book used an inner monologue. In the book, his inner thoughts were controlling the plane. That was the whole, in Hollywood, they call it the MacGuffin. That was the MacGuffin. Mm-hmm. This plane could be maneuvered by your thoughts, so it was faster than your hands. So in the book, it was ongoing dialogue in his mind that allowed you as an audience to know what he was thinking, what the enemy pilot was thinking, what he was going to have to maneuver here to outmaneuver. You know, it was all verbalized, but in italics. Like, so Craig Thomas could tell the story with dialogue, but it was really inner monologue, right? Well, we had to figure out how to do that. And even Clint said, this is going to be your big problem. I don't know how you do it. You guys are writers. You'll have to figure out how we do it. You know, because we couldn't have him just talking to himself, you know, like, okay, now I'm turning left because I see his missile coming, so I'm going to put out a heat wave to cause that to maneuver the missile in another direction. We couldn't have him doing what Craig Thomas had him doing in his head in the book. So we eventually arrived at the black box. That was not in the book. You know, we came up with the black box, which of course they always use in accidents, where the pilot does say a few things and they can take the few things that are in the black box to kind of work their way back to figure out what happened. We used a black box device, but we still had to, and that was our contribution. He didn't do that. He had him talking to himself, which we couldn't do. And then we chose maybe a couple moments where he actually got to verbalize to himself, you know, oh, good move on his part, you know, one of those kind of things. But so that whole sequence, which was about, 25 minutes, that dogfight was a long part of the film.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We had to try to find a way to translate his inner monologue all the way through to make all of it make sense. Because in the book, it was very dramatic. Every move the other guy made, he did a counter move, and then he'd do a move that the other guy countered, and it was really compelling. But if we didn't figure out a way to kind of allow that narrative to somehow be obtainable by the audience, we felt it was just going to be a boring kind of chase like in Star Wars, where they're just going through some canyons. And I felt, in retrospect now, we could have gone further, meaning we could have we tried to keep it as minimal as possible because Clint was worried about it too. So that was really the single biggest writing challenge of translating a book. Books, you know, I'm sure you guys sound like you're very hip to the filmmaking deal, but there's even something that's happening now with younger screenwriters. They're verbalizing the inner life of the protagonist, which was not allowed when I first started. The producers say, do not put anything that can't be seen on, you know. Now they're good. Now they're having, you know, he's just had a fight with somebody, he's walking away, they'll put son of a bitch, you know, or, you know, he met this girl, he walks away, heaven. You know, they're putting inner life now, and I realize they're all doing it. So on this particular script, I'm doing it for the first time. I'm saying, well, they're getting their movies made, so they're cheating, so I'm going to cheat too. And some of them are, when I teach at Storyboard, it's a group of writer directors who get together. That we were meeting at Fox Studios until COVID. Now it's all on Zoom. But that group analyzes a new screenplay on a movie about to be released, and then they have a moderator and break it down. In the last year or so, I've probably done 3 of them. I've noticed that they're all doing it now. Some of them too extreme. They're making up for not that high quality writing by constantly putting in, you know, take that, you asshole. You know, they're putting those things down that's in the guy's mind. The thing is, the audience still can't see that, you know, so that's a cheating what they're doing.
It's also, you know, the showing versus telling thing, right?
Yeah,
where
exactly.
We talk about, Scott and I on the show talk about a lot of older spy films, you know, Hitchcock films, or, you know, the Harry Palmer, Michael Caine films. And so much of what's happening, you're reading through the character's actions or on the face of the actor, versus a lot of newer films, it's narrated. It is right there so, you know, the audience cannot miss it. They need to understand everything. Don't let any of it be ambiguous.
Yeah, and that's what Clint used to say, and we tried as best we could. He told us that was going to be our biggest problem. He said, I don't even know if it can be done. My own feeling is, I wish Alex and I had, and Alex and I are still friends, by the way. We haven't worked together, but on one project. We've worked on a couple projects we tried to get going, just didn't get them made. But most of the time he writes his way and I write. But we're close, you know. If we could do it now, I think we would have done that sequence more skillfully. We'd have found a way to communicate more of the inner life that was narrated in the book that we couldn't narrate here. And it would have made that sequence all the more compelling. Because the book really, neither the Clint's character, his name was Mitchell Gant, nor his opponent, the best pilot in all of Moscow, not one move did they make that they weren't inner life analyzing what it will do to the opponent, and it didn't work, or it did. So it was really easy to follow the dogfight because we're hearing their inner thoughts. And, you know, so had we to do it over again, I would have put in more.
Right. And how detailed was the action in that last section on the page? Because I'm just curious where you are working it up to versus when the effects people step in to, you know, realize it. The action in the book was very specific. And in our script, we tried to make it very specific too. But again, that lack of narration of their inner thoughts interfered with that. When it got to the special effects guys, they kind of simplified it too much, in my opinion. They took some of our moves and reduced them. You know, we were trying our best to show the different moves and counter moves so everybody could follow along. They made it simpler than I would have liked. But then
I wasn't there. We weren't writers enough of stature where Clint would let us sit with the special effects people. That was not going to happen. So, and Clint wasn't there either. He was in Europe shooting all the Cold War stuff. So, the special effects people really worked on their own. Mm-hmm. So we tried very hard. That was the hardest section. You asked what the hardest section was. That was really, really difficult. And we tried to the best of our ability to make all the moves and the counter moves and how they were both using this advanced apparatus to try to make it work, all work. It didn't all come out in the end the way we would like to have. It was good enough, but it was, again, I don't blame special effects. I blame us as writers for not being more courageous to get more of those inner monologues out there than we dared. We were still in the school of every studio would say, do not put anything on the page that we can't see, right? So we were trying to obey that, yet cheat a little bit. Now I would cheat a lot more.
Well, you're being quite critical in a sense of what you did back there, and I will just.
I'm critical in everything I do.
Well, that is a common trend. That is a trend with writers.
I'm so bad as an actor, I can't even go to a cast and crew screening. I won't watch dailies. I don't want to know. When the film comes out, I send somebody to go see it and tell me whether I was terrible. And if they say, no, you were pretty good, then I'll sneak to a theater and kind of sit in the back row and kind of look like this. That's a problem I've got.
Well, in that case, I always give credit where it's due. And, when we announced we were tackling this film, we had tons of messages from people saying they were big fans of it and they're looking forward to hearing our coverage.
That's so
and
sweet.
To hear from you as well. We've got a list of questions, people on Twitter that want us to ask you, which we'll get to in a little bit as well. This is not a forgotten film. This has left a mark on spy cinema. It's left a mark on Clint Eastwood's career. It's one of his, it may not be in the top echelon of Clint Eastwood films, but it's highly regarded and it still gets, thrown around.
Yeah, they have a documentary that I mentioned this to you, Scott. Mm-hmm. They're shooting a documentary called 1982, The Wrath of Khan, I think is the working title right now. And they interviewed me for that documentary, because Firefox was out that year.
Yeah. And
I was surprised. I don't even know if I'll end up in the film. I got a weird feeling that I'll be one of the casualties, because right before me, Paul Schrader was interviewed. Right after me was the guy that wrote 48 Hours. They had big names being interviewed. So why would Wendell Wellman still be in that pantheon of people? But I was surprised at how many insightful questions, like you guys are doing, the interviewers had for me about Firefox. I thought, no, that was how many years ago? 30 something? I don't know, 40? What? I lost track.
Close to 40.
That's great for me to hear. I know, for example, Sudden Impact, which I didn't get a writing credit for, because again, Clint, when we were on the set, and I said to him, I think I can fix this script. There's some holes in the middle. He said, he said, yeah, I know. I've always worried about those holes. And he said, but what do you want out of me? I can't give you a credit. I've already promised a credit to the kid Stinson, I think was his name. I said, no, I don't want a credit. I said, this is just a thank you for giving me this great part, doing Firefox. And he paid me back in spades. He got me a 2-picture deal at Warner Brothers and everything else as a result of that. But what was the point I was making? Oh, Sudden Impact is the one I think everybody would know. I'm surprised because that had go ahead and make my day.
Mm-hmm.
It was such a huge hit. When it came out at the same time as Scarface. Those two movies came out together on Christmas, in that, whatever that year was. And Time Magazine even did an article about what's happened to America, that two of the most violent films ever filmed come out on Christmas Day, and both had lines around the block. They were huge hits and still are. And I get still recognized to this day from that movie. I'll be at the gym and some guy will go up and go, no, look, I was a businessman. I was young. They'll start quoting my lines, and that was 30 years. So, but to hear that Firefox has that impact too is really incredibly exciting for me. Thank you for that. Any of those questions I want to ask, fire away.
I had a question about, Clint Eastwood did another cut of this movie. So there's two. There's like the 2 hour, 20-ish minute, and then there's like the 2 hour. I was curious if you had a preference between the two.
I like the 2 hour 20.
Yeah.
I thought it was cut too much to begin with. I'm glad he did that. I didn't even realize it until I saw part of it on TV, on cable once, that he'd lengthened the film. Yeah, some of the stuff that we did, especially in the middle, he'd pared down, he kind of put it back in. I prefer the longer version.
Right.
Because the book was an epic in a way.
There's a lot cut out from the book that's not in the film, absolutely.
Yeah, it was epic, the book. I mean, it really was. I don't know who this Craig, I don't even know, he's probably not even still alive, but he was a good writer. I thought that was a good book. And I don't even know if you guys knew it, but when we came in his office after to meet him, to have him, he said, look, I went to Warner Brothers. There were 5 studios bidding on this book. He said, before publication. And I went to him and told him I wanted the book. And if they didn't get me the book, I was leaving the studio. So they sent an entire private jet of executives over to outbid the other 4 studios to get him the book. So again, that was only Alex and my 3rd script that we were getting to do. Something of that huge of status was incredible.
Right.
Well, the last question I had myself about Firefox was, because we've had a lot of screenwriters on the show in the past, and it's been very much a mixed bag on what happens once you finish the script. Because sometimes you're kept around on the production to do any like final touch-ups on the script on set, or they send you for another draft. Sometimes it's as soon as they have that script, they are, see you later, Wendell, your check's in the post. So how was the experience for you? Were you kept around to do like brush passes or anything like that?
No, the second scenario was the scenario. Clint, when he finished the second draft, he thanked us, told us he was going to shoot every word, was his quote. And he went off to Europe to shoot, and we were never brought on again. However, only about 3 months later, he called me up, not Alex. Alex had we'd split up as a partnership shortly after that script. And Alex talked Clint into recommending Alex to Burt Reynolds for a project he was trying to develop. So Clint had done that, and Clint then called me and said, I feel bad because I've already done a favor for Alex, but I haven't done anything for you. And I said, don't worry about it, But about a month later, he called up and said, I've got this project. I want you to take a look at it. I'd like you to maybe write it. And it was sudden impact. It was just I got the project again, like, if you like it. I mean, I read it overnight, started taking notes, called his assistant about 2 days later and said, I'll do it. Tell Clint I'll do it. She never told him. And so about 3 months after that, I kind of felt bad. I thought he must have changed his mind. And he called me up and he was really mad. And he said, this is Clint. And I still remember that speech. He said, I don't mind saying no. He said, I say no 90% of the time. What I don't like is when there's no answer. I said, what are you talking about? And I pulled out and read him the notes. And he said, oh, no. So he said, I didn't know. His assistant never told him, so he hired another writer. But he never forgets. He came back 6 months later and called Lenny Hershey and said, Wendell's an actor too, isn't he? And Lenny said, yeah. He said, well, have him come in and read. I have a part I think he could do if he's good in the audition. So I got the part, and then I ended up rewriting part of the script, and then he got me a 2-picture deal. I mean, so he, but his MO was not to bring at least then. I think now he probably lets the writers, I know, like, he started using Paul Haggis, who did Unforgiven for him, and then he used him again. I'm sure he let a writer of that stature come in and do some, and I did it on Sudden Impact. I did tune-ups on the shoot. So, but that was our first job. I'm sure he didn't think he needed to pay for us to go to Europe to sit around, And that's where he shot 90% of films in Europe. I think it was either Austria or Czechoslovakia. I've forgotten which place he shot most of it. Did I answer your question, Scott?
Yeah, absolutely. I think Cam had another.
We were done then.
Yeah.
And I had the same experience on a couple other projects. And now, of course, this company I'm working for at the moment is assuring me I'm going to be a producer on the film and they want me on the set. And my attitude is, we'll see. Sounds good. But I have signed a producing contract on it, assuming they get it made. But, I think from where that was to now, the Writers Guild has fought tooth and nail with the studios over the years for more and more participation. I'm sure you guys are aware that most of the writer strikes are not just about money. They're about letting the writer be more involved, letting him be part of the production, let him do the rewrites, let him have a producer status. So they've come a long way since then. Mm-hmm. And but look, I didn't care. I mean, he told us, I'm making your movie, and that was life-changing for me. So, mm-hmm. And it led to a writing career.
We interrupt this program to bring you a special report.
Agents, we have some breaking intel.
That's right. Independent podcasting is not cheap. Equipment, hosting, research, these all add up, and we don't have Vesper Lind to bail us out.
And also, we don't want to run ads on the show. Leave the shopping to Harry Palmer, we say. And this is a big reason we created the SpyHards Patreon.
So we're here to ask for your help. Please consider joining the Patreon. You'll not only be gaining access to our exclusive lineup of reviews and film commentaries, but also helping support the show. We're currently saving to upgrade our sound equipment to meet IMF standards and give you an even better listening experience.
With a wide range of flexible options and an ever-growing catalogue to dive into, become a true Spy Hard today and join the circus at patreon.com/spyhards, or you can find a link in the show notes below. Now, Cam, resume the spy jinx.
Well, I think, we've kind of covered Firefox. I had a couple sudden impact questions because you talked about how you were brought in to, maybe fix some issues on set with sudden impact. I'm just curious, what were the scenes or the issues that you helped iron out?
Okay, in the middle of the movie, it starts out with, you see the early stuff, which plays in flashback, where this gang of punks rape Sandra Locke and her sister. Mm-hmm. And then the movie sort of begins. She's now an Avenger, and she's killing these guys one by one. And then you meet Clint, and they always have Dirty Harry prologues, always have him, beating the crap out of some criminals. And of course, they had the great scene in the coffee shop with, are you ready, punk? Go ahead, make my day. I knew the film was going to be a hit when I saw the preview. I was in a theater for another movie, and they showed a preview. And when he said, go ahead and make my day, the whole place erupted and started cheering. People were screaming. I thought, this is like a phenomenon. I had no idea, But in the middle of the movie, he goes from realizing somebody's out there killing a couple people to suddenly making the jump that they're all part of a group, they're all part of a gang. And it wasn't there in the script. It wasn't there how he made that sleuth perception. So I sensed that when I was reading it and preparing as an actor for that part. And I thought, okay, this is a chance for me to help fix it for him. So I, again, did what I usually do. I just crafted 5 additional scenes, but used them all within the sets he was already going to use, and just had second visitation of the sheriff or him or to eventually find the solution on a picture on the wall in the sheriff's office with all of us together. That was, so I came, when I was on the set, and at that point, Lenny Hershand, his agent, had become my agent. I called Lenny and said, I know how to fix the script so that, you have a logical deduction process. And he said, okay. He said, well, Clint's really funny about that, so let me approach him on it. I'll be up there when you're there. And so Lenny called Clint over. We were on the set, and he said, look, Wendell kind of has an idea how to kind of fix the middle. And Clint said, he said, yeah, I knew there was a problem there. What's your ideas? And I already had it completely outlined. I had 5 new scenes. And, I said, if you have this, and then you have this will lead to this, will lead to that. And then you could all bring it together. And then you see this picture, and then you go to the office again, and the sheriff's removed the picture because he realizes you're on. Clint loved it. And he said, yeah, but we can't create any new sets. I said, no, I'm staging all of them on sets you've already done. And he was blown away. He said, all right, go ahead. And he said, the office is at your disposal 24 hours a day. I'll have my assistants there. You feed them pages and, and that was it. So the middle of the movie, I just built a structure of sleuthing that wasn't there.
Right.
And he shot every word,
yeah.
every moment. In fact, it was like Firefox. I had done the work. I was in my hotel room for 3 days, just working night and day, trying to make all that, and fed pages down to his office, and the assistant was typing them up. And I kept thinking, well, Clint's going to call me on the phone and say, well, wow, this is really great. Nothing, no silence. And so then the 4th day, I had to go back out there and shoot the rape scene with the other guys. And I was really nervous, like he must not have liked the work. But then he was in the middle of the scene. He came walking over to me and just said, I read the stuff. I love it. We're using every word. I've already got crews setting it up, and fantastic. And he said, in fact, when I'm finished with the scene, will you come in the trailer with me? I'd like to fix another scene, just you and me. So we worked on a scene together in his trailer. So it makes sense. Does that explain it?
Yeah, it really does.
I fixed the sleuthing process. It just wasn't in the script. I don't know how.
And that makes sense, being, Dirty Harry's a detective, so you'd think that should be there, but
yeah. And I was kind of drawn to, I still am, I'm drawn to detective movies and detective stories. I love that genre. And I've written several thrillers myself that have gotten close to being made, and then they never get made. And I get actors attached and financing. One just fell through for me where I already had $500,000 raised, and a major director and producer and everybody else on it. And then the financing pulled their money, and the other people then pulled their money. It's happened a bunch of times. But I love thrillers and I love detective stories. And I really have that kind of mind of, okay, this will lead to that. And then if the detective puts that together, then you got I just can kind of think that way a little bit. It's kind of mathematical.
Right. And I would love to know, just with Sudden Impact as well, as an actor, the scene where you have your encounter with Sandra Locke in the garage, your death scene.
Yeah.
That is an incredibly tense sequence. I think you are fantastic in that moment.
Oh,
I would just love
you.
to know about just performing that scene.
Oh, okay. That's funny that you asked that. And that's the one where I told you people quote I'm at the gym. I go to Gold's Gym in Venice. Yeah. And I'll be lifting weights, and some guy goes, hey, Wendell, how are you? Now, look, I'm a businessman. They still, this is, 30 years later? So bodybuilders love Clint Eastwood, and they love Sudden Impact especially. So they must watch it on late, night Showtime or something. I don't know, that they can still remember those lines. There's funny you asked that. There's a story with that. I knew when I got the script, I auditioned. She had me reading that, of course, that monologue from my audition. I couldn't get the easier scene to read, like in the hardware store or something. I had to read that. So I'd worked on it really hard. I knew it was going to be a bitch, because I'm talking for a full page.
Yeah.
It never says a word. And yet I've got to go through stages of protest to grief to denial. I knew all that was going to happen. So I had worked on it a lot. And Clint saves money as opposed to these productions where, like Klansman, they brought me up the day before principal photography, and I was there till the last day. They brought everybody up, and we all stayed there at the expense of Paramount for the whole, deal. Same with Summersby. I was down in Virginia for, but this Clint doesn't do that. He flies you in for your scenes and flies you out. So I didn't know when they'd already been shooting for about a month, when the production office called and said, okay, you're flying out tomorrow. You're going to be flying to Santa Cruz. where they shot the early stuff in San Francisco, and then they shot a lot of it in Santa Cruz. So I said, I hadn't been prepared. I mean, I hadn't packed. I didn't know when I was going. So I said, I was a little nervous. I thought, I hope they're not doing that scene first. And I said, so what scene am I doing tomorrow? And they said, oh, you're doing the beach scene with all the guys and Sandra. I thought, oh, good. I just have 2 lines of that. Hey guys, it's my turn. All that kind of stuff. So I flew up there, and I missed the first plane. And I forgot what the plane was canceled. I think it was what it was. So I had to take a next plane up, and there was already a studio limo there and a driver, and he was very agitated. And he said, you're late at Clint's. We're expecting you on the set. And I thought, okay, well, the plane was late. So he drives me, keeps driving. And I realized we weren't going to the beach, and we were going to a neighborhood with a garage. And I just said, what scene are we shooting? And they said, oh, you're dying scene. So when I got out of the limo, Clint came up and said, oh, you're here. He said, get in makeup and get over here. He didn't let me wear makeup. He said, get your costume on, and we want to do a rehearsal. So I had no time to even rest, prepare, run lines. I just threw on my clothes. I did a 10-second, I taught myself this relaxation thing that I do, where I just let all tension kind of work its way down my body. I was able to do that for 10 seconds and then walked over there, and he said, okay, let's run it one time and see what you're doing. We'll just kind of do it as a rehearsal. And we did it. And he didn't tell me he was already shooting. Huh. And he said, really good. I already got that on camera. You're really great. You're not even moving. You're doing it all with your eyes. Let's just do a couple more, but I've already got it in camera. I mean, he just tricked me, so that night after shooting it, I went out to dinner with the other 2 lead villains, the girl that had, that had that voice, Audrey Neenan, and then the bad guy, forgot his, Paul something, whatever his name. I went out to dinner with both of them, and I told them that, and they both went, oh, no, man, I didn't have my lines learned before I got here. So, I've often thought about that what if I'd been one of them?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But thankfully I had it. But thank you for the compliment. That was a hard scene to do.
It's fantastic, because in a different movie, it's do people remember that scene? Maybe not. But like the way it's played just within the movie is just so effective and really does, I think, have a lot of power to it.
Well, man, you guys have made my day, to pardon the pun. Seriously, I worked really hard on it, and probably it's the single hardest moment I've ever had to do on film. I have a thriller that I did with Kyle Richards called Curfew, which they claim they're re-releasing this month, or at least on Netflix or something, where I had some kind of hairy scenes in there, but never a scene where on camera it's just you talking for a good page of dialogue, and at the end begging for your life. So thank you for that. And people do remember. That's the lines they always quote.
Yeah. Oh, I could see why. And you were saying that you were drawn to detectives, and you referenced earlier adapting Fair Game, which became the Stallone movie Cobra, which is kind of a cult hit.
And Fair Game as a book was really good. It was a detective story. He knocked all of that out, just made it a wham bam, thank you, man. He did that movie because he was with his girlfriend at the time, and he wanted to get her apart with him. Yeah, so he didn't really, in the book, that detective goes through, and I had it in my script, goes through at least 25 to 30 pages of painstaking while they're on the run, trying to figure out, he was realizing he knows this guy, and where does he know him from, and how can he get an, he was doing major detective work, and there was interrogation scenes. He cut all, yeah, go ahead, sorry.
Well, no, you're kind of answering my question. I was just curious what your original concept for the film would be, and is there anything in the existing film that does echo it?
In the original concept, she wrote a really good book and my screenplay is very faithful to that book. And there's at least 4 or 5 major scenes while she's in the hospital recuperating from the assassination attempt, where he keeps coming back and prodding her more and more, trying to find something he can work with. And they become adversarial, and she really hates him. And then when they tell her she's going to have to stay with him for safety, she can't stand him. And then they go to a safe house, and it's a really dramatic 5 to 10 minutes of film where they're in a safe house together, and she hates his guts and he hates her. And yet he's continually needling her and prodding her and trying to find something to figure out who this faceless killer is and why, right? It's a why movie. Why is this person shooting this innocent woman who's riding a bike through gate? Well, in the book and in my script, she was riding a bicycle through Golden Gate Park when she was shot. They had her running. Yeah. So it was a detective. I'm just good at those. I just understand those. I don't know why.
Interesting.
Well, one thing we actually spoke about this off air, Wendell, when we first chatted.
Yeah.
And that was that you had also written another Dirty Harry script, and you mentioned it earlier on in the interview as well. Now, I know some of this is, I think it's still embargoed. You can't speak about it due to...
Oh, yeah. I've never been allowed to show it.
Mm-hmm.
It actually hurt my career because I was going through kind of a downslide after I lost my credit to Stallone, and people would say, let me see one of your latest writing samples. And I was forbidden to use it. And it was some of my best writing, at the time. I've written better since, but it was such a great, it was his concept. It wasn't mine. It was a great high concept for that Dirty Harry. But that was a detective thing too. And it was, again, a why. He was being Dirty Harry, and this one was being hunted down. But he didn't know who and he didn't know why. So your job as a writer is to allow them to go through red herrings, right? Go through a maze and take false doors, hoping to find, so they can eventually get to that who and why, and then they can defend themselves. That's essentially the structure of detective storytelling in a way. It's also in a weird way structure for horror stories. Eventually the hero in the middle has to start trying to figure out who's behind that mask and why. And then that gives them a clue on how to defend themselves. So it's a structure I understand.
Well, it's also a similar structure to a lot of spy stories. You have to, put the clues together and
exactly
undercover and find the secret Russian plot and take them down. It's
to me, every time a movie comes out that has that, like the next one coming out is Death on the Nile, which is about to come out. I'll be there in the first week. You know what I mean? Even though it may not be that well done, I'll be there. Those are the films that I grew up with and that I love. And what was the last one? They did the other one like a year ago, Kenneth Branagh directing, and
Murder on the Orient Express.
I was there for that first week. It wasn't the best of films, but I don't care. I love those kind of films. I love that storytelling, and I think most of the audience does too.
Oh yeah, definitely. You look at the success of Knives Out as well. So yeah.
Oh, yeah. And even the miniseries that keep coming up on TV. There was one that was done in Ireland a year ago. I remember the actress, Irish actress, Sarah Green. I can't remember the... You know the miniseries I'm talking about? It was either on HBO or Show. Really great, about a murder up in Northern Ireland on a sea town. And, these two detectives are investigating it. And, you give me a thriller, I'm going to be there. And the joy of it is always we as the audience and the detective are trying to figure out who and why, right? The who and why was cut out of Cobra. But Stallone didn't need to. He was at the top of his stardom. He'd just done 2 Rambos and 2 Rockies. They just wanted to see him in a muscle t-shirt with a toothpick and beating up on the bad guy, right? They didn't need who and why. And he was smart enough to figure that out. It just unfortunately lost me my credit because he cut so much of my stuff out.
Totally.
Well, I suppose I'm asking on behalf of Dirty Harry fans everywhere. Is this? Yeah. I get the idea that this script is locked down forever. It will, unless
it's locked down forever, pretty much. I think. Could I show it now? I'm sure he would probably care. But he's done so much for me, 3 jobs, you know, 2 movies that were made and 1 movie that didn't get made, but he paid me really well for it. In deference to him, I just keep it under. I got it here. I mean, you know, someday I'll show it to somebody. It's a great concept. If I could tell you the concept, you go, oh, yeah, wow. You know, just think of Dirty Harry in a really weird circumstance. And it's funny, actually. So the project that you're talking about, the final Dirty Harry, it was his idea. And he'd actually had a writer attempt like 50 pages, and the writer didn't know where to go and gave it up. So he sent me those pages and said, see what you can do with it. But I did a page 1. I just took the idea and created a brand new script. And I thought it was a go. I mean, Lenny Hershand, not only did Clint call me and say, I mean, we did the same 2 drafts. You know, I did 1 draft, then he called me from Carmel and bitched about some more gardening meetings that he had to go to, and you know, ladies' luncheons. And he really is his character in a way. He's still a macho guy, you know. And so, you know, and then he'd say, well, you know, I was thinking maybe if we could add such and such here and take out that, then I think we're good. And I did that. And then he called and said, okay, man, we're going to shoot this fall. This is my next film. Congratulations. And Lenny called me at the time and said, congratulations, Wendell. I want you to take 2 weeks off and go have a vacation and go. And he said, when you get back, Clint's going to probably want a few polishes during the shoot. And so I, you know, went to one of my favorite places, London. And I had 8 other actors, friends of mine, that were all already going or already there. So a bunch of us hung out together in London for 2 weeks. And I felt like I was, in that moment, that's after Firefox, that's after Sudden Impact, that's after losing the credit to Stallone on Cobra. I'm back in the game. I'm in London with a bunch of actor pals from LA. I now have a Go movie with Clint Eastwood where I'm the sole writer, you know, not a partnership or not anything else. And I felt on top of the world. And I got a funny little story there too. One of the actresses that was there was dating the manager of U2 at the time. So I had dinner with them a couple of times. I'd already met him in LA, and he was English. His name was Ian Flukes. And he said, you know, U2's playing up in Cardiff Wells tomorrow night. Why don't you take the train up and meet us there, and we'll all hang out backstage, and then we'll go home together. So I took the train up, and I'd already seen U2 a couple of times with them in LA, and he'd gotten me VIP passes and all that. So I went up, took the train up to Cardiff, loved the ride. I'd never seen the English countryside before. It was so beautiful, you know, and it got up there, and the train was late, and it was raining in Cardiff. But a cab, I said, look, I got to get to it. I don't even know where the stadium. He said, oh, yeah, it's a soccer stadium. I'll get you there. And he drove me over to the soccer stadium. And I thought, you know, he'd given me this little ticket and a pass. I thought it meant that, like it did in LA, that after the show, maybe I could go downstairs with all the celebrities and have an hors d'oeuvre, right? So I got to the stadium, and Chrissy Hines and the Pretenders were the opening act. They were playing at that time. And some guy let me in. He was like one of those door guys. Oh, yeah, follow me. He took me down to where a little private room where U2 and their wives and kids were all having dinner. They gave me a plate, and I sat with the band and ate. And then when they went on stage, they invited me to stand on the stage. So I stood 10 feet away from the edge.
Wow. For
the whole show in a giant sock. It was incredible. I mean, so that was the point of all that is I felt like, to quote James Cameron, the king of the world. Then I come home to LA after all of that. And I got sick on the plane, and I came home, and after a couple of days of recuperating, I read the trades, and it says next movie for Clint Eastwood, The Deadpool. And I was just stunned. I didn't know what happened. And I, you know, called Lenny Hershand. He heard my voice, said, yeah, I know, you know, Clint just felt this movie was a little more ready than yours. And he just, you know, we're still going to do it, you know. Anyway, that's the rise and fall. Hollywood. It was a good lesson in hubris for me, by the way. You know,
Yeah, no
you
kidding.
think you're up there, right? It was Sinatra. You're up one day, you're down the next. You think you're rolling in London, and then you're back in LA, and reality hits. Yeah,
You'll always have Cardiff, Wales.
I'll always I cherish that story. You know, I have never seen U2 since, even though I'm a big fan. I've seen them total 4 times. But that was obviously the apex. And you're right, I'll always have Cardiff, Wales. And they were great to me. I mean, you know, Edge's wife was giving me her dessert, and they were talking to me. They were great to me. I mean, you know, I was Ian Fluke's friend, so that was good enough for them. Oh, there was one more story with that. After the concert, I somehow lost my friend Marla and Ian. They went in another car, and I got out, and I thought, okay, well, it's raining, it's pouring, it's cold. I'm going to take the train back to London. So did a lot of other people. And we got to the train station, and there were no more trains till the next day. I had nowhere to stay.
Oh.
I was in the rain, and there were thousands of kids in the same plight. All the hotels locked their doors because it was a throng of people looking for a place to stay that couldn't get a train back to London. And I thought I was really done for. And then I'm in front of this one hotel, and it's U2's road crew are getting out. And they said to the dorm, no, he's with us. And they let me in. And it saved my life. I mean, so I always have Cardiff, Wales. Yeah. And by the way, Scott, that's probably part of why I love England so much. I just, you know, that experience was incredible.
I can't say I've ever had a good experience in Cardiff, Wales, but that's just poor choices as an adult.
Oh, no, I know that. No. Cardiff, Wales was obviously a working town. I was up I told you, in Ireland 2 years ago, and I spent some time in Belfast and Dublin. I love Dublin as much as I do London. I hope that's not a insult to you guys. I love Dublin.
Hey,
you know.
Cam's in Vancouver. He couldn't care less. So
No.
No, I've never been to Vancouver. I want to. I hear it's beautiful.
Not right now, but yeah, come in the spring or summer.
Yeah.
Well, Wendell, I'd be remiss if I didn't include the questions from Twitter. Now, I have curated them. I've cut it down to 3 questions here about Firefox.
Sure.
Okay.
I hope I haven't talked too much. I've told you a lot of stuff.
Oh,
we appreciate it.
I've still got some more. Don't you worry.
Okay.
So the first one is from D Chantry on Twitter, and he asks, there were 4 books written in the Firefox series. The sequel was made quite quickly after the first one. Was there ever any talk of following up the original Firefox with the second book?
No, Clint didn't want to do that. He felt he did it and wanted to move on.
Which is probably the best idea. Probably wouldn't fly now. They love their sequels nowadays.
Yeah.
Fly?
Aha!
That would have been great because I'd have gotten another job. You know, we would have gotten the job, I'm sure. So,
well, the books are quite highly regarded, to be fair. The sequel apparently is very good.
The books are highly regarded?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he's a good writer. He was very detailed.
The second and third questions both come from @KidCreole. The first one he asks is about the video game they made a couple of years later, Atari made. Did you have any involvement with the creation of the video game? Did you write anything for it at all? Because they did expand things.
No, unfortunately, no, because that's where guys are making their money now. Yeah, no, nothing. Again, that's probably as a result, Clint, they probably called him and said, I don't want anything to do with this. That's your thing. You know what I mean? I'm sure that was where that was.
And the last question from Kid Creole, we've already kind of asked his second question, but I will kind of expand on it for him. What was your favorite moment working with Clint Eastwood?
Probably in all the things I did with him, probably my favorite moment was in Sudden Impact when we were shooting the hardware store. Clint had set up a whole line of shots for that scene. And he came up to Audrey, Audrey Neenan, that was the actress, and me, and said, I'd like to see what you guys are thinking about doing in this scene. he said, just sort of do a quick, line through, and if you got any ideas. I said, I just had, since I'm the manager of the store, and I said, we're in this aisle here, I'd like to kind of be moving while we do it, so I can kind of be moving away from her and be inspecting my inventory. And he said, well, let me see what you're doing. So I sort of did that. She just sort of followed me down the aisle, and I would say a line to her, and then I'd go back to, writing things down about my inventory. And that was my way of getting away from her offensiveness. He loved it. So he said, you know what? He went to his crew. He said, lay down some track. We're going to track. And he shot it as a moving shot, all because of my little idea for the scene. For him, at that time, the biggest movie star in the world, to allow my idea cause him to reblock a scene, and you know how much that costs, right?
Mm-hmm.
Was such a compliment to me and symbolized our relationship in a weird way that I'll never forget it.
Well, I think that brings us beautifully to the final set of questions we ask every person that's been on a show that we've interviewed, okay? And this is really just to prove your spy credentials. So the first question we have is, what is your favorite spy film of all time?
Wow. I don't even think I can answer that. I'm thinking of so many that I like. You talked about the Le Carre series, some of those films with Michael Caine, and, those people. I feel like some of the James Bond movies are spy movies, and I love the James Bond canon. I love the two Terence Young directed, Dr. No and From Russia with Love. From Russia with Love, I really loved at the time. It probably looks really dated now, but most recently, James Bond Casino Royale, I really love. Tinker Tailor, what's it? That one.
Yeah, Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy.
Soldier Spy. Gary Oldman was in that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that film. You can't do wrong for me with those movies. I mentioned the Death on the Nile, and there was one a long time ago, Mano a Mano on a Train. I'm trying to think of what was the name of that. There was one. It was two guys on a train. Ones that are set on trains, I love.
Right.
Even aberrations like the series Snowpiercer. I don't watch it much, but I love having people pursuing each other on a moving vehicle. There's something about that confinement that intensifies the danger for me. There was one with two guys on a train. It might have been Robert Shaw.
That could be From Russia with Love.
Yeah, that's Bond and Red Grant on the train throughout.
Oh, okay, there it is.
Back half.
Okay, yeah. That blew me away when I was young. That just blew me away. I just thought that's filmmaking at its finest for me. Storytelling is a better word. Look, I even grew up on mysteries. I read all the Sherlock Holmes books when I was young. My favorite of all time was Hound of the Baskervilles, but I read them all. Maybe that's where I read them as a 12-year-old and 13-year-old. Maybe that's where this interest engendered. I don't know. But at the same time, again, my career is a bunch of accidents in a way. I didn't look to put myself up for Firefox. It came my way. Same with Fair Game, which I didn't look for those. But I've always loved them. They're my favorite films. They're my favorite form of storytelling, really. I love romances that are built within the structure of that. It just allows the writer a kind of freedom. You've got that strong spine. One guy's after another guy, and one guy's got to solve the who and why, but then you can have this nice, steamy romance fit in the cracks like Jimmy Page does his licks. It's just pleasurable writing for me. It's freeing writing for me. That wasn't a very good answer because I can't name one.
Well, we got From Russia with Love, and it's fantastic. So
yeah, you gave us a few. Well, that leads me to my next follow-up question. Although you may have given me the answer with your choices in film. Who is your James Bond?
It has always been, up until now, Sean Connery. And I still think of him as the ultimate. He had the most panache, the glamour, the poise. He could wear a suit like nobody else. He could hold a cocktail glass like nobody else. And he had the incredible voice. But I've really become a fan of Daniel Craig. I just love Daniel Craig. I'm sorry he's hanging it up. But I was a fan of Daniel Craig before he did them. I mean, there's something virile and intense and feral about him that I, as an actor, respond to. There's an innocence to him in a weird way, even though he's doing the things he does. There's a vulnerability. They're going to have to, I don't know who they're going to get for the next. Probably my pick would be Tom Hardy, but I don't think he'll get it. But I love Daniel. The two of them are neck and neck for me. And but I liked them all. I mean, I loved Pierce Brosnan. He's a wonderful guy. I met him a couple times, just briefly, but he's just a sweet human being. Roger Moore had the humor. They all had some, but Daniel Craig, I thought, and I haven't seen the newest one yet. Unfortunately, I was sharing a house with a woman and her daughter, and they refused to watch it. So now that I got my own apartment, I get to see it. But I thought Casino Royale was just at top of the line. I mean, that card game, which occupied 20 minutes of the story or more, was incredible.
Yeah, about that.
The level of tension they built for us as an audience. Usually you watch card games. That's another example, like sitting in the cockpit in Firefox, where you kind of have to externalize internal thoughts. So it's hard to follow card games and films, right? Because they're not externalizing. They did that so well. You followed every move that he was making, and that Mads Mikkelsen or whatever. You followed every thought process and that going on. It was great.
It was.
Yeah. So it's a neck and neck with Sean Connery and Craig, but probably at this point in my life, I like Daniel Craig's realism the most.
You'll have to let me know what you think of the last one when you watch it. I'll be interested to hear your thoughts.
I'm looking forward to it. I got the DVD right here. They send the Writers Guild sends us all the films to look at, so luckily I've got it. So I'll get to see it now. You guys are great. This is great. This is the best interview I've got to do.
Well, that's very nice of you to say. Thank you. Yeah. I have one final question before we let you go.
Okay.
Because we're talking about Clint Eastwood here.
Sure.
And we're talking about favorite films.
Yeah.
What's your favorite Clint Eastwood film? I'm stumping you with these today. I'm loving it.
You're stumping me with this one. Oh man, let me start by saying, obviously, Unforgiven is probably maybe the achievement of his career. I mean, probably the most masterful from a craft point of view for me, any movie's ever made. But for me personally, I'm more of a fan than an artist when it comes to him. It's a tie between Sudden Impact, which I'm in, and the early Sergio Leone Westerns,
Tough call, yeah.
Or his original Dirty Harry was great too. That's where I became a fan of his. When it was ironic, I was up on the set. I was up on the location of, what was the name of the movie with Lee Marvin? I can't even think of it. Klansman. I was up there for 3 months. It was Northern California, and we were up in the middle of nowhere. So one afternoon I had free, and I went down to the local matinee. They had one little theater in the town, and it was the original Dirty Harry playing. And that's when I kind of really became a fan of Clint. So you got to include that one too, you know. And then that was so ironic that only 6 years later, I'm in his office. He's about to hire me. You know, I just thought, I was watching him as Dirty Harry, and I thought, man, to ever achieve that kind of greatness would be special. And here I am, you know. So, but I still love Sudden Impact to this day. I mean, I don't watch it, but it occasionally will be on. I'll flip it on for 5 minutes. I'm just entertained. It's just funny, you know. It's, you know, and his westerns in Italy, when he'd ride in on that horse with that blanket around him and the cigar, you can't beat that. Just, there were 3 of them, right? I can't even think of which would be my favorite of 3, huh?
Yeah, there's the 3. Good, the Bad, the Ugly is the one most people hold up the highest, although
that's
for a few
probably
dollars more.
My choice too, but
yeah.
He's, you know, I've always thought to myself, what do I do when he's gone? He was really like he doesn't feel that way, because I ran into him at a party a couple years ago and he didn't recognize me. I had to say this to and he kind of looked at me like, I said, "Hey, Clint," and he kind of, "Oh, hi." And I knew he didn't recognize me, you know, which was not flattering, but I'm sure he doesn't feel the same way, but I saw him as like a big brother in my life. He gave me advice. He gave me 3 jobs. He gave me his agent. He got me a deal at Warner Brothers. He couldn't do much more for a guy than he did me. And the only thing, and I don't know why, other than I worked really hard for him every time and did the best job I could do. And he told me once, I really appreciate it. He said, "You seem to really care." So, but he's still at it, still doing it. So, I don't know what the moral of this story is, but what I say to young people, you know, when they ask me about, well, what should I do? I just say, look, I always say this when I go and teach a writing class, and they'll say, "What's your advice to us?" I said, "Don't do this unless you have to do it. You know, if you can find anything else to do, you'll have a more peaceful life." And, you know, you guys didn't ask this, but my regret in my life is that my career was so, even in the fallen period where I couldn't get work, you know, and I'm never stopping. I'm writing another script, trying to get back, you know. I let it occupy so much time in my life that I didn't have time. I never got married. I never had kids. And now as an older guy, that's my biggest regret. And, you know, I've had my share of relationships, hoped they would work, and they didn't. But it's a career that's really demanding. And the great parts are larger than life, and the down parts are, it hasn't happened to me yet. I'm still getting some work, and I'm unexpectedly right now at this point. I mean, they're re-releasing that little horror film that I starred in called Curfew, and they did an interview with me like this for that film that they're going to show before it screens. But the saddest part of the business for me is seeing the older actors and people kind of losing their way. Because the caravan does move on. You know, the dogs bark and the caravan moves on. And but I'm still alive. I'm still healthy. I'm still getting work, and I still have something to live for. And ultimately, I'm going to probably move. I'm thinking of moving back to the East Coast somewhere, possibly Nashville. So that my last days can be out of here, so I don't have to be one of those guys, you know, that stayed too long.
Right.
That's really what I want to do. But I have a lot to be thankful for, and you guys have been great. You've made me feel like what I did had some value. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing all these experiences, because there's a lot of people out there that, you know, love Sudden Impact. They love Firefox. And I think these stories are great to have for them to hear and be able to kind of continue the relationship they have with the movie into, you know, your personal experiences.
Yeah, well, I hope, thank you for doing this. And I've done 3 interviews now here in a short period of time. One was the documentary 1982, which they were more only, you guys have been really all embracing. You want to know about Sudden Impact. You want to know about other films, and you guys, they just wanted to center on Firefox and how did it stand with the other blockbusters in that year, and then the Curfew, they just limited it to what was your experience doing that part. It's you played a total maniac, and how hard was that on you emotionally, and blah blah blah. I played a complete psycho in it. I mean, just off the rails. So that all these came in the last 2 months out of nowhere on movies that are 20 or 30 or 40 years old is just, it shows the power of film, I guess, doesn't it?
Yep. And the people are always going to rediscover movies, right? Even movies that are seemingly forgotten.
I didn't understand it. Really, I never understood it until after Sudden Impact. I'd already done, a couple of major movies as an actor. I'd done a bunch of TV as an actor. I'd done movies, television. I'd written Firefox for Clint. I didn't get it until Sudden Impact. That movie became so much a part of America's, how do you put it, zeitgeist for a few years.
Yeah.
That I would not know it, but I'd go in a restaurant and a waiter would come over and he'd immediately say, all right, now look, I'm a businessman. They'd start quoting lines to me without even introducing or taking my order. And I thought, this is just one little film with two major scenes. How does this, you don't realize the power of that big screen, what it's doing.
Well, you've created something, many things, and this leaves an I'll use the title. It leaves an impact.
Yeah.
That was really corny. I'm sorry for that.
Great. And look, let me just say something. While I say that on one level, on another level, I'm troubled. Okay, about it. I'm troubled.
Yeah.
With that. Well, I'll leave you with that. And I've become kind of a Christian. I've become a Christian in the later part of my life, and I've kind of been exploring more and more what God is, what is God, and who is God, and what His relationship is with us. And I realized that in some way the movie business has the power that's overwhelms even people's relationship with their maker, and it can be harmful too. Is what I'm trying to say. In other words. I kind of, one of the reasons I told some friends and told some of I have a lot of friends and relatives who live in Nashville. I'm not from there. I've never even been to the town, but I have so many friends moving there. I thought that might be a good place to go. And somebody said, well, why would you want to do that? I said, because when I die, if there's a funeral for me, I don't want it just to be movie posters. I want it to be about the other parts of my life. What am I doing for others? What am I doing for my fellow man? What kind of things can I do that are away from this thing? And pardon me for saying that, I just felt like I needed to, because I didn't want it to come off that I see some directors, it is bigger than life for them, and everything is about the movies. It's not for me. I still have a life, and I want to make sure I communicate that as well.
Yeah. Well, it's like, they call it the Hollywood machine, right? And within that machine, you can have amazing experiences, but there's things that exist outside the machine that are also just as important, if not more so.
Yeah, and that's all I'm trying to say. I'm as I'm getting older, I'm finding the richness of friendships and family and having a peaceful little farm to live on and go out and kick the tires. I want to experience that too. I've lived in this town now for a long, long time. I mean, literally, I came out of UCLA and went straight to acting school. To my mother's chagrin, I turned down 2 PhD fellowships, one to Boston University, one to UC Santa Barbara, and went to acting school and started bussing tables at the Cafe Figaro. I've never stopped. And, I now envy my friends who are married and have kids and have grandkids and have a home. There's other things in life besides this. But I'm also very grateful that I've got to do what I got to do. And I'm grateful to you guys that you care.
And we're grateful that you could sit down and talk to us and still have the passion to do so. And that's the important thing about it. And I think that brings us to a really lovely final note. And again, I want to thank you, Wendell, for taking the time to sit with us and to chronicle, not just Firefox, but the legacy you are imparting on Hollywood. You still are.
Yeah, well, you're welcome. And look, I just wish I could meet all your audience. I'd love to talk. I love people that care enough about this kind of narrative that they're willing to meet with each other. That's just fantastic. So if you ever need me back for something, feel free to call me.
All right, we've got your email, but yeah, Wendell, what are you working on at the moment? Is there anything in the pipeline people can look out for?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm doing this writing. I'm rewriting this movie called Harold's Story, and it's based on a book called Harold's Story, and they seem to love what I'm doing. I'm almost finished. I've only got the climax to rework. And so, they claim they're making this in the next year. And so look out for that. That'll be written. I'll be one of the writers on it and also producer on it. And Curfew is supposedly going to be re-released. And I consider that, even though it's a chintzy little low-budget horror movie, it was directed by director Gary Winnick, that was his first film, and he became a fairly well-known movie director and television director who's passed away, unfortunately. And that's going to be either on Netflix or in the theaters or somewhere. And even though it's a crummy little film, it's probably my best performance ever on film. So they didn't release it at the time. So I did all this work on it and nobody ever saw it. So it's kind of nice. Somebody's going to put it out there so you can kind of see what I was like at the peak of my acting career. And then I've got two other projects of mine that people are trying to raise the money for. One's called House in the Canyon, another's called Sail Away, which could or could not happen. So things are still happening for me.
That's awesome. If we'll try and find some links for Curfew and put that down in the notes below so people can go and check out that film.
Yeah. I mean, it's a terrible film, but it's good. Actually, I have a decent performance. I'm proud of my work.
Well, Wendell, again, thank you so much for your time.
You got it. And why don't you guys stay in touch with me, okay?
You got it.
Definitely.
All right, man. I hope I acquitted myself favorably.
Well, there you go, folks. We were clearly men on a mission. That might be our longest SpyMaster interview of all time.
Yeah, I think the Don McPherson interview we did for the Avengers was quite dense. There was a lot of content there, but I think this was the longest one. Yeah,
and perhaps the most personal of interviews we've ever done as well.
Yeah, it gave us a real look, not just at everything that went on with Firefox, Sudden Impact, adapting the book Fair Game into what became Cobra ultimately. It gave us a lot of insight into that, but it really also just gave us a lot of insight into what is the life of a writer and actor in Hollywood. Because so often when we think about Hollywood and the movies we talk about on this show, we talk about Michael Caine, we talk about Sean Connery, we talk about Clint Eastwood, but what about so many of these writers who we've tackled or actors who we've tackled who did, a handful of projects over a number of years and then you didn't hear about as much. It was really interesting to get a sense of, just from Wendell, talking about his life in Hollywood.
Yeah, and credit to the man, and I again want to thank him for joining us on the show, but credit to him for being so open about his experiences, because a lot of people could be quite guarded about this, but he was very open and emotionally available and really told us how he felt about the whole process. I mean, hearing the story about him seeing Clint Eastwood at a party and Clint not recognizing him, 35 years later. Now, I probably won't recognize people I went to school with, so I can understand why Clint didn't recognize him. But having your idol who you spent years working with forget what you look like can be quite a harrowing experience.
Yeah, definitely. And I really appreciated that. So often when we talk about these movies, it's more on a technical level. It's like, how did this sequence come to pass? Well, let me tell you, it started at point A, we got to point B, and then we got to point C. Whereas I really liked how all of the stories Wendell told us were very much infused with just personal experience and the kind of the emotions he was going through at the time through developing these ideas and what the personal journey through his entire career was. I thought it just made it that much more, mesmerizing for me to listen to and take part in.
From all our experience talking to screenwriters, they can be very personal experiences. Some screenwriters are very much just do the job, write the script, move on to the next one. But some people do infuse their personality and their situation around them into their work. And I feel like Wendell is one of those writers.
Well, I think this may have something to do with the fact he's also an actor. And,
Mm.
an actor, you have to be someone who's very much an observer of humanity because you need to reflect that back through your performances. And so he's very much, I think, in touch with that side of himself. And then to have him also be a writer and capturing human experiences, through his work and adapting these books and then these screenplays he's writing, it's kind of like a perfect melding of the two things for, I think, a really fantastic interview subject.
And that's not to say we didn't spend a good 45, maybe an hour talking about Firefox, which is the film, of course, we're focusing on this week. And he gave us, a direct line to exactly how that script was put together. And, we asked him some really tough questions, like, what was the hardest sequence to adapt from the book to the film? And, you might not think it was the action sequences at the end in the dogfight. You might think it's the dialogue that he wrote. But it was actually trying to adapt because the book, of course, focuses on the direct neural link between the pilot and the plane. Whereas you can't really have that in a spoken word film because, you have to hear thoughts in a sense. So he's either saying it as a dubbing afterwards or he's just talking randomly into the plane. So you have to find a way of justifying him talking in the plane, which is why they created the concept of the black box.
I loved hearing him talk about everything to do with the action because I did have the question mark going in of how involved was he? Because, sometimes you hear the writer basically writes, dogfight happens. And then the effects people come in and the storyboard artists and all that. Okay, and that's how we got the action scene. You look at how not just Marvel, but a lot of blockbusters work now, where they previs all their action sequences and then basically tell the writers or the directors in some cases, here's your action scenes, right around that. You need to work these in. And I really enjoyed hearing him talk about the nuts and bolts of trying to communicate this from the book onto the page and deliver an action experience that people would be satisfied with, not just on a sensationalistic level, but also on an emotional level.
Absolutely. And he is also clearly a fan of the spy genre. When we asked him the questions at the end about his favorite spy movies, he was jumping between Bond films and Le Carre adaptations. He knows the genre. And he even asked us, what we liked about the film. And what the scenes I pulled out was the espionage in the train, which I mentioned on the review, is one of my favorite bits of the film. I think that's a really well-crafted scene. And he spoke at length about how he developed that part of the film. And also, I think one thing we both remarked on as an interesting part of the story was the PTSD element.
Yeah.
And he went on to say that wasn't that big. It was in the original book, but it wasn't a huge part of it. And they really beefed that bit up. So credit to them both for putting a spotlight on something that wasn't really taken particularly seriously back in the 80s.
No, it's a movie that's become a cult favorite. And that's so often the case with movies, especially movies that are kind of strange. Firefox is a strange movie. 90 minutes of it is like a very slow burn, Cold War espionage story. And then you have this kind of, as I say in the interview, like a post-Star Wars effect sequence kind of melded onto it. That unto itself is incredibly unique. And so if you have something that's very unique, and especially if it has an icon like Clint Eastwood attached to it, and I think a high level of technical polish going on with the action and also the espionage stuff, that at a certain point, even if it's critically slammed, people are going to come around to it because they're going to see it on TV, they're going to see it on video, whatever. He talks about how at the time people were really hard. But you know what? There was 10-year-olds, 12-year-olds sitting in that movie theater watching Firefox who were bringing a perspective that would kind of become at least the cult, interpretation of that movie in the years to come.
And they're the listeners like yourself who've tuned in for this interview. You wanted to hear more about Firefox, and by gosh, I hope we delivered for you.
Definitely. And this was just a real pleasure. I mean, I was saying to Scott before we started recording these wraps, it was just very surreal to me to be sitting here talking to, an actor who I'd seen in the 430 Harry movie back in the day when I was 18, 19 years old, and I did a rewatch a couple years ago. But just to talk to someone who, helped write on that Dirty Harry film, as well as obviously Firefox, but just what a surrealistic journey. And, Wendell talked himself about how things just happen, luck just happens. And like, for both of us, the fact we got to wind up in this interview was, luck, and obviously you, making this happen by tracking him down and contacting him. But nonetheless, what happens if this podcast never starts? It's these weird journeys you go on in your life that result in very fascinating little moments.
And they only happen when you try.
It's true. And that's the moral of the story, folks.
We can, before we wrap up, did you have any sort of other favorite moments you wanted to highlight?
Yeah. And it was actually talking to him about the movie The Klansman, which I don't think many people maybe remember. But when I realized it was directed by Terence Young, I was like, oh my God, this is an in. And I was fascinated to hear him talk about the experience of working with Terence Young on one of his first, experiences in the industry. Because, Scott, we've covered, obviously the classic Bond films. We've talked about Thunderball, and we've talked about Dr. No and From Russia with Love. We don't really have a connection to anyone who worked on those films to be able to talk about Terence Young on this podcast. We don't have SpyMaster interviews for those movies. And so, like, I don't know how many other opportunities we'll have beyond this to be able to talk to someone who had firsthand experiences with one of the legendary Bond directors.
Absolutely. And this is, I mean, you gave me credit for finding Wendell, and thank you, but I will give you credit wherever it's due. And you did this before, actually, in one of our previous interviews, where you realized there was a Bond connection that we could make. And that's your exceedingly good knowledge of James Bond right there. And credit to you for coming up with that question, because, that's some really insightful stuff. And hearing stories about how Terence Young auditions actors and things like that, that's all the sort of stuff that could get lost to time if no one's telling these stories. So I'm glad we had the chance to find out.
Definitely. We talked to John Glenn recently, and we have the opportunity here. Probably people talk about being directed by some of the newer Bond directors at some point down the road, hopefully. But some of the ones like, your Guy Hamiltons, your Terence Youngs, those story opportunities are getting smaller by the day.
And credit to Wendell, that was like his first major foray into Hollywood, and he was working for Bond royalty. I think if you or I were in that position, we probably would have been fangirling out, asking him all sorts of questions about Dr. No's rubber suit.
And also the alternate script where there was the monkey that was Dr. No. It would be nothing but questions about that.
Yes. How many bananas were there?
Did you ever audition a monkey? I need to know.
I need to Dr. No. So again, we want to thank Wendell for joining us, and thank you all for listening. We hope you've enjoyed our coverage on Firefox. It was certainly an interesting film, and I'm glad we had the opportunity to go back and explore it.
Definitely. Really unique 80s movie that it's definitely got its fans, and I completely understand why.
So, the question is, what have we got coming up next week?
Yes, we are going to be meeting back up with Xander Cage. No, wait, scratch that out. We're meeting up with Ice Cube in XXX State of the Union.
Yes, it's the Xanderless XXX film. We've got some great guests actually come to join us to dissect this film. I've never seen it. I didn't go and see it in the cinema as a protest for it not having Vin Diesel in. So it'll be an interesting first-time watch for me, and I'm looking forward to getting extreme once again.
Yes, and we should also mention we will be dropping a commentary over on the Patreon for The Bourne Identity. We're talking about, with Wendell, adapting an espionage story into a major motion picture, and we're going to look at the same thing when we do The Bourne Identity.
Yeah, that'll be another great commentary. Obviously, we're just following up from our recent one with the Ipcris File, which is another literary adaptation as well. It seems to be a trend we have here.
No kidding.
Well, if you wish to support the show, we'd love to have you over on our Patreon. You can find out more about the different tiers and how you can support SpyHards. And just remember, every penny goes towards improving the show over on patreon.com/SpyHards, but there'll also be links below in the show notes. And of course, your mission, should you choose to accept it, is to watch XXX2 State of the Union and join us next week. Don't forget to follow us discreetly on social media at SpyHards. That's SpyHards. But Until next week, go ahead, make me mayor.